Do you make smart decisions? People who are asked that question about themselves usually say yes, but if they answer it about others, they're much more likely to say, oh no, people do not make smart decisions. But if you're willing to say no about yourself and others, well, you may either be very self-deprecating or very self-aware. And you're probably right. To understand why people make bad decisions, we need to understand a few things about the brain first. Actually, a few things about our mind. The brain is an organ, and I'm not talking about our anatomy, more about our consciousness and decision-making ability. Hi, I'm Seth, a nearly 20-year marketing veteran with experience in user experience design and behavioral science, and I read a lot so you don't have to, even though you still should. To understand why people make bad decisions, the first thing we need to understand about our minds is that we have a deep cognitive desire to understand the world around us. You know that already, but I needed to say it. Needing to understand the world around us is one of the most defining things about us as beings, and not knowing why things happen makes it impossible for us to guess what will happen next. When we don't understand the world around us, things get bad for us quick. And the world doesn't make this easy on us either. It's gotten incredibly difficult to understand how things actually work over the last couple hundred years due to technology. Most things have now become so complicated, so entangled in systems, that you have to spend your life dedicated to studying to be an expert. Though that doesn't stop people from pretending, but our minds have a trick for getting around our need to make sense of things. Take a look at this picture. What do you see? Well, if you said a circle, you're sort of right. Most people would say circle, but that's not really what it is. To get to where you can call it a circle, you had to fill in some blank spaces between those dashes. And that's the trick we use for every information gap we have as humans. Each and every time we're presented with information, our very nature is to fill in those gaps, those empty spaces, so that we can understand that thing, that situation, and then predict what we need to do. Flee, fight, feed, or that other less pleasant F word. And that trick of filling in the blanks serves us well and has for thousands of years. But sometimes if we're paying close enough attention, we recognize that we don't know enough to fill in those blanks. In those instances, typically we turn to experts for understanding how to connect those dots. At least, that's what's worked for humans for a long time. Experts and trusted institutions aren't doing so hot these days. If I were to read off a string of numbers and stop at any random point and ask you to name as many numbers as you can in order, you'd probably be able to only name 5 or 6. But if I asked you to do that in a stressful situation, or did something to cause you pain during that activity, you'd remember even fewer. So the second thing we need to know about how our minds work is that during stressful situations, we develop physiological deficits. These deficits impact our ability to effectively determine when we should guess to fill in the blanks ourselves, or when we need to trust an expert's opinion, and even which experts we should trust. When we encounter stress, whether it be recognized or unrecognized, whether it be one thing or the compound stress of many avenues of our lives intersecting, our physiological deficits grow, and they can get huge. And like Trix cereal, these deficits come in 3 flavors. First, motivational. Basically, I don't have the energy to figure this out. Second, cognitive. I'm mentally distracted and I'm not able to figure this out. And third, emotional. I'm emotionally distracted, biased, and unable to think clearly about this. When these deficits grow large enough for long enough, they lead to a state called learned helplessness. The deficits of learned helplessness leave us unable to ask, read, learn our way into a genuine answer and explanation of the things that confuse us. So our ability to understand the world becomes impeded, leaving an empty chalkboard for anyone to fill in the gaps of our understanding on. So when someone scribbles an explanation that helps explain what we don't understand, when they fill in those gaps for us, our deficits block us from being able to think clearly about that explanation. Because we are physiologically blocked from thinking clearly, we don't know if that explanation really makes sense, and we can't determine if the source should be trusted or not either. That's a bad place for us to be in, and it happens far more easily than you think. It's just that most of the gaps and the rationale we use to explain them aren't that big a deal. In those instances of confusion, we accept the explanation that is, 1, the easiest to understand, 2, the most aligned with our personality biases, and 3, coded to match or at least appear to align with our existing core beliefs about how the world works. Those explanations we choose to believe may be the easiest one to understand because it makes the most sense to us, or it's spoken by someone who looks like us, feels like us, acts like us, or it's just coded to align with our core belief systems. In times when the world becomes more complicated, our identities that were once tied to social groups, to institutions, and to ideals start to wither. Those things don't fill the gaps anymore. And for many people, they grasp more tightly to the most core element of their identity, which is often religion. That's why religion is so often used to exploit all the different kinds of groups in complicated or even uncomplicated times. As a core component of identity, attaching ideas to religious beliefs allows stressed and confused people to save time and energy by not having to think about what ideas are filling those gaps for them. And to be clear, it's not only religion that's the core identity of people that gets exploited, but it is the most prevalent. But that's where learned helplessness takes the most toll. Because once you put that gap filling on autopilot, it's really hard to pull out of that spiraling tailspin. What makes it even more challenging is that it gets really easy to confuse the autopilot tailspin as empowerment. People going through this start to feel like they're finally finding all of the answers, seeing the real truth. But it's not. It's just a rewarding chemical being released from the brain because a gap has been filled, which makes you feel good. So you want more. Anyway, after all that, the third and final thing to know about our brains takes us back to the beginning of the conversation. We should know and expect ourselves and others to be irrational, to not always make the best and smartest decisions. I mean, for me, as a marketer, it's my job to know how humans work and how to use those human idiosyncrasies to manifest change, hopefully for the better. But you don't need my experience to see this in the real world. The amount of stress on Americans in particular over the last 5, 10, 15, or 50 years has compounded into a situation where very few of us are able to make complete sense of our world, and the suggestions of our media ecosystems very easily fill in all of our gaps. If our physiology had gauges like a car's dashboard, we'd likely be sitting near empty because of all of our deficits. And so we're bound to make mistakes, to believe that we understand how the economy works because we watched that show or listened to that podcast, to believe that we know better than those around us because we follow that guy on TikTok or subscribe to that Substack. And those are all examples of me personally that I have to be aware of. All I'm really getting at is that you just can't trust yourself as much as you think. You're prone to ignore the gaps in what you know, and then make assumptions, and to not recognize when you have or don't have enough information to trust those gap fillers. We're busy, and we're stressed, and it's how we work as humans. And we're prone to trusting the easiest, most recognizable, most worldview affirming answer. The best trick to identify when this is happening to you is getting really good at identifying when someone is trying to make you feel emotional about their message, because an emotional deficit is the one that's by far the easiest to fill by someone with ill will. So be careful out there. Thanks for listening.